that we have the opportunity. We're so grateful that they not only wrote this book, not only have dedicated their life to the Jewish people, each in their own way, which we're so appreciative of. I'm almost embarrassed to introduce either one of them dedicated their whole lives to the Jewish people. They also woke up at 3 a.m. in Israel. I woke up at 4, it's 3 a.m. in Israel, just to be able to talk to us and to educate us and to help us. And so I want to first of all say thank you. Also, I want to say to everybody that we bought some books from the congregation, which you can get the books through us. But I want to encourage and to give them out as gifts because they're so beautiful and so brilliant, and they're accessible to all different ages, and it's timeless. So the book is never alone, and I really want to encourage everybody to get this book. And the book was partially written in our area because Gil wrote the book while he was talking with Natan on the phone while he was caring for his beloved mother of blessed memory, Eileen Troy, and in caring for his brothers. So it was partially here. And finally, the format that asked for certain reasons, everybody will be muted except for the hosts. So we're grateful to sponsor this with our Beltway Vaad, our beloved rabbis from our community, Rabbi Antin, Rabbi Cooper, Marat Freeman, Rabbi Topolowski. And so if people have questions, send them in the chat to the hosts, and then Gil will answer questions as he conducts his interview with Natan Sharansky. I have not given them either one their proper titles, but that's because that's my defect. So I apologize for that. And without further ado, I'm so grateful to Gil Troy and Natan Sharansky.
Good evening, Erev Tov. Thank you, Rav Shmuel. I don't know how to thank you for all the leadership you've given to the community over the years, for all the inspiration you've given to my particular family. You've really been our Rav on so many levels. And this evening is just another example of your generosity. I know you've read the book from cover to cover. I know you've done at least 3 Divrei Torah based on the book. I know you've shared it with some prisoners, which for us was deeply moving. So I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And Natan and I would like to dedicate this learning tonight to the memory of Inga Horowitz, who is the late mother of my beloved sister-in-law, Cheryl Horowitz Troy, because this is they're going into the last day of the saying Kaddish for her. She died 11 months ago, and Rav Shmuel, you and I were together in Toledo at the funeral. So Inga Horowitz was born in Germany. She understood the power of never again, but she lived her life as a real Jewish patriot, and she understood the power of never alone. And that's really the arc that we're going to talk about tonight. The response to anti-Semitism, but making sure that Jewish identity isn't just anti-Semitism, isn't just anti-Zionism, but is an affirmative, positive vision, and that's the vision of Never Alone. And without further ado, I want to introduce Natan. And let's start, one of the things that Rav Shmuel picked up on is that by now, the book came out in September, we've done quite a number of Zooms. And what you said I thought was very clever, and I also want to thank all the Beltway rabbis who were a part of this consortium. You said, why don't we talk about Natan Sharansky's relationship with Washington, D.C.? And I thought that might be an interesting way of getting into some of the themes of the book. And what was really interesting is that before you, Natan, went to Washington, Washington came to you. So why don't we start with your first contacts with Washingtonians, members of the Washington Jewish community, and also Washington members of Congress and senators back in the 1970s, including a very high stress meeting with a Senate delegation, which I think gets one of the key themes of Never Alone, which is we might know that when we're part of the Jewish people, we're never alone, but it doesn't mean we always agree. Natan.
Well, yes, good evening, everybody. If not going into the details of the beginning of our struggle, after all, you heard a lot of it, many of you participated in it. So, but it started from the fact that a number of young Jews under the influence of Six-Day War and some later events became very interested in their own identity, their own history, and discovered Jewish people and Israel. And that gave them power to start the struggle. But this struggle could continue maybe for a few days before everybody will be killed. If from the very first day it wasn't the struggle of all the world, and first of all the American Jewry. And it so happened that the American Jewry, in fact, started being involved. Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry was created in 1964, 3 years even before the Six-Day War. And so when I became active in the movement, first of all, as an activist, as a demonstrator, and so on, very quickly it became clear to me that the big or the very important chain in all this is connection with all those tourists who were coming as tourists, Jewish tourists. They were bringing literature, they were bringing different materials, and they were taking back our letters, our studies of this description of different acts of anti-Semitism, situation with Soviet Jews in general, with our letters smuggled to Washington. And so these meetings with these Jewish tourists was a really very important pipeline which kept us connected to the world. And with the time, the refusing Jewish activists also started meeting with some American politicians directly. And Edward Kennedy played a very important role. He was the first American senator who made a physical meeting with the refuseniks at night in 1974. At night, after he finished all his official meetings, suddenly he asked for the car at 12 o'clock. KGB was alarmed. They didn't know that it wasn't in the schedule. They immediately rushed to find those activists, Jewish movement, to arrest them in order he will not meet them. But they already were meeting in the apartment of Professor Lerner. And so that meeting happened. And but it was like the first, though non-official, but direct meeting. With the time, there start coming those who were making it open, warning in advance Moscow that they're going to meet with Soviet refuseniks, and later they'll share this information with Soviet officials from what they hear. And there was Father Drinan, a congressman from Massachusetts, I think, who became a great friend of our movement and one of the leaders of the struggle, my release and the release of the others. He came first in the end of 1974. There were Congressman Dodds, who later became sent, and some others, a very rare case. But once I'm getting a very secret message, and I'm like an unofficial spokesman, by making all these connections possible. I'm getting a message from American embassy, that, of course, when I was talking to them, there were special toys for children to play when you're writing, and then you're erasing everything that you wrote.
Magic slates, we called them.
Yeah, that's what we were using to talk in the apartments, which, of course, were all bugged by KGB and so on. So we are meeting with him, with friends, Joe Pressel, and then he takes such a slate, and I understand something interesting. He said there is official visit in 2 weeks, an official visit of American senators, Congressman, 14 senators, Congressman, 14 leading senators are coming, a delegation led by Humphrey and Scott, and there are 2 members of delegation, Javits and Rybakov, senators, who want to have a meeting with leading refuseniks before the delegation goes to Brezhnev. So they really want to present the case of refuseniks straight to Brezhnev. And that was, and he's asking me to organize it. And of course, if KGB will know in advance that we are going to do it, we all will be arrested during the visit of the centers. So it has to be quiet. And I understand immediately importance of it. For the first time, we are becoming a part of official negotiations between Soviet leaders and American Congress senators. And it was a big difficulty to prepare it. Then in the very end, suddenly one of the leading refuseniks tells me, Natan, don't take it personal. It's great that you're doing it, but we are not going to go there. And he speaks in the name of the half. I tried that all the groups will be represented, and he's speaking in the name of the group of so-called kulturniks. We are those politics, those who are believing that the most important thing is political pressure and fight for our aliyah and immigration, and group of kulturniks who believe that the most important thing is to educate culturally, and we can be refuseniks all our life. Let's, in the meantime, make sure that people study Hebrew and so on. It was almost like internal discussion. For the first time, it went out. I became almost crazy. It's such a important secret organization. Preparation is made. The senators will come. KGB will be just near, and we'll make laugh of ourselves. We cannot even meet together. We can't sit in one room together. So, and then, thanks, I said, guys, I cannot guarantee you anything. I'll pass the message that you want separate meeting, but will feel very stupid. In the end, Javits had a good sense of humor. He said, well, you don't have time for two meetings, but he understands the Jewish community. If there are people who want to sit separately, I have two rooms in my suite. You can sit in two different rooms, and I'll go from one room to that. Because it was a joke. We had a great meeting. 10 senators came, 14 refuseniks came. Everybody participated. Senators wouldn't even notice that there was a conflict, but that's how the conflict went open. And then one of the journalists who was covering this said, Natan, you should not be afraid that it's all publicized. If it is constructive, good confrontation between us, it will help to discuss the issues. And of course, he was right. From that moment, this debate between kulturniks and politics became much more public and more fruitful. But as to the senators, they got a picture. They didn't care about our internal differences. They cared about the issue that there are, as we were insisting, hundreds of thousands of Jews who want to leave, and because of repressive policy of Soviet Union, it's not happening. They had the list of the names, we gave them of 3,000 refuseniks. Well, of course, later all this became part of my accusation, high treason, but that's how there were no internet, and of course no satellite TV, and even telephone conversations were blocked. But that's how we built the case, and that's how senators became our postmen. By the way, at that meeting, one of the senators sent a church, said to me, I have some letter to somebody, you can help me to find to whom. He gives me a letter, and that's letter to me, and I open it, and there are pictures of my wife, Avital, from Israel, and that was the first picture which I received. So the senators were also playing the role of our postman and the deliverers of our pictures, and mostly, of course, the leaders of that political pressure, which in the end broke Soviet Union. Yeah.
Senator Frank Church was Wow.
Yeah.
So what's fascinating is you're in Moscow. You've been cut off from Jewish history, and this kulturniki debate ends up replicating the debate in the Zionist movement between Theodor Herzl and Ahad Ha'am, Ahad Ha'am being the cultural Zionist and Theodor Herzl being the political Zionist, and so many other ongoing debates. But one of the points we're trying to make is we're not afraid of debates, right? At the same time that we were having these internal struggles, you're also all shouting together, and we were shouting with you, Am Yisrael Chai, Shlachat Ami, the Jewish people live, let my people go. In Washington, people often define their lives by their connections to presidents. And I was thinking we could say that your presidential resume is that your marriage was somewhat dictated by the timing of Richard Nixon's visit. Your prison sentence was somewhat lightened by something that Jimmy Carter said. You were ultimately freed by Ronald Reagan. Bill Clinton at one point mocked you for being somewhere where you weren't. And George W. Bush helped make you a best-selling author with A Case for Democracy. So we're going to break that down. Let's start with, how did Richard Nixon have anything to do with your marriage to Avital?
Well, first of all, we in Moscow, among ourselves, we had our heroes and our villains. So our big hero was Senator Jackson, of course, because he was the one who was pushing to make connection between economical assistance to Soviet Union and our plight.
Henry Jackson.
And Senator Jackson, yeah. And our bad guy was Kissinger and Nixon, because they were pushing for quiet diplomacy. They wanted to have this policy of detente. They didn't want to put the direct demands, open demands to Soviet Union. They were saying that with quiet diplomacy we'll get more, and they were against Jackson Amendment of direct linkage. But for Soviet KGB, there were no nuances. When President Nixon is coming, they want all the troublemakers, those who like them, those who don't like him, all those who can express their disagreement with Soviet policy have to be isolated. That's why when in the end of June 1974, President Nixon came, a number of troublemakers, like 25, 30 so-called troublemakers, were simply arrested in the streets and disappeared, and I was one of them. At that same time, they called to my wife, with whom we decided that we'll have a chuppah, and but she has to try to apply for Israel separately, because I'm already refusing. At least one of us maybe will be in Israel. At this moment, they are calling her and say that she's getting permission, she has to leave immediately in 10 days. Well, she's resisting. She's saying that my files have disappeared. I'm looking for him. I don't know where he is. They, of course, don't say anything. But she says, I can't leave because all the money that I have to pay, and she has to pay a lot of money for visa, are with him. In the end, she starts preparing her chuppah at our home without finding the right people, what was very difficult, without knowing whether they'll be released or not. On the 3rd of July in the morning, Nixon left Moscow. So on the 3rd of July in the evening, I and some other troublemakers were released from prison without any explanation why we were in prison. On the 4th of July, we had our chuppah in our apartment, and some people, the guests were coming straight from the prison. And on the 5th in the morning, I took her to the airport and promised her that I'm sure that with all these developments, the next 6 months we will meet. In the meantime, she'll start preparing our place in Jerusalem. So we met 12 years later. Yeah.
And we actually had the privilege of being at Shabbat lunch for your 45th wedding anniversary. When I raised a toast, because it was July 4th, honoring your 45th wedding anniversary, Avital said very quietly, without any pathos, just as a matter of fact, minus 12, minus 12, because you really you lost those 12 years. And of course, you have some excellent marital advice based on your experience. Yeah,
well, as we say in the book, that it's very good to live in the opposite order, and as with many things in my life. So it's better to be divorced first. We were separated for 12 years, and then we lived happily after this. And when I see some of my friends after 30 years of good life are divorcing, I'm really sorry for them, why they're not doing it in the opposite order. And of course, more general advice is for everybody, before you go to prison, you have to marry the way I married, to make sure that your wife will fight for you.
And then when you entered politics, you also said you went to prison first. So sometimes it helps to live life to live life backwards. So by 1977, the pressure is mounting, and you're accused of being a spy. You're arrested and you're thrown in jail. How does Jimmy Carter fit into this story?
Yeah, well, first of all, of course, I didn't know anything about what's happening outside, but I did know very well from the very first moment that here they're preparing a big case against all our movement, and I'm accused in being in high treason and espionage deliberately in order the fear of such a punishment will influence on many other people. And they were explaining me that that's it. The world will not know what's happening to you. You know our history. Everybody who is sentenced to as an American spy will not be alive if he or she doesn't cooperate with us. And what means cooperate? To condemn Zionism and to say that Soviet Union is right. And it was clear to me that they are making serious decisions whether to stick only to my case or to prepare. They were preparing simultaneously with dozens of Jews. And somewhere like 2 or 3 months later, it became clear to me that they are narrowing it, that they are afraid to make it too big. They want to concentrate on me. I didn't know what's happening. But what happened that like some weeks, two months after my arrest, President Carter made a very unprecedented statement for the president. He said that he personally looked into the archives of CIA. There is absolutely no connection between Sharansky and CIA, and that's why it's absolute lie. Why it was unprecedented? Because his own advisors were telling him that presidents never react because you react officially that this is not a spy. It means that when you don't react, it is a spy. And we are not saying to Soviet Union who is our spy and who is not. But the world jury was already mobilized, students and housewives, as KGB was saying with neglect, but this movement of students and housewives, Jewish movement, was already pressing. And Stu Eisenstadt, who Alan Dershowitz and Irving Kotler went to Stu Eisenstadt, who became the lawyer of President Carter, and Stu Eisenstadt convinced him that that is a question of death and life. So Carter made a statement, which was very powerful. I don't think it was made big impression on Soviet Union. Soviet Union knew that I am not a spy, but it did help for many Jews, or for many of those who had some reservations. Who knows? Maybe something is happening. It made this case much more clear, and it helped to unite or to overcome the prejudices or precautions of many people. And I believe that was the moment when Soviets understood that they cannot go with the case against too many people. They have to concentrate on my case.
And you're sent to the Gulag, the extensive Soviet prison system. I should point out that so far we've criticized 2 Republicans, Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, and praised 2 Democrats, Henry Jackson and Jimmy Carter. But in the spirit of nonpartisanship, now let's go to Ronald Reagan, who in 1983 gives a speech calling the Soviet Union the evil empire. Now, one of the strange things about our writing relationship is, first of all, I always work alone. And I write about dead presidents, and to work with someone who's a living historical figure was for me quite a change. And one of the crazy things is that we have very different life experiences. I grew up in the vast playground called New York City. You grew up in the vast prison system of the Soviet Union. When you were in the Gulag in the late 70s and early 80s, I was at Harvard University. At Harvard University, when Ronald Reagan gives that evil empire speech, we hear that the Dean of American Historians, Henry Steele Commager, calls that speech the worst speech ever given by an American president. How did you experience the speech of Ronald Reagan's in 1983 in the Gulag, and how did you even hear about it?
Well, we couldn't listen to the Voice of America because we couldn't listen even to the Voice of Moscow. But we could, if you are not in a punishing cell, you can read official Soviet newspaper, and you know how to read Soviet newspaper and understand what's happening in the world. And here is the article which is condemning in the most strong words American president for him doing something against all the norms, international norms. He called Soviet Union evil empire. That's ridiculous. That's put him out of all these normal diplomatic relations. and so on and so on. A very, very critical speech. When we found out that American president called Soviet Union evil empire, for us was the best proof that the days of the Soviet Union are counted. Why? Because we did know how so weak is this empire. We dissidents were explaining for years. We were trying to explain to the world that this awful, dangerous power, which is killing, which is occupying, which is controlling all 1/3 of the world, in fact, from inside, it's extremely weak power, which spends all its energy to control the minds of the people. And if only the world will stop helping them to survive, if the world will stop having illusions about this bully and will see the real picture, the days of the Soviet Union will be counted. That's what we believed, and my friend Andrei Marik in 1969 wrote the book, If the Soviet Union Will Survive Until 1984. And he was explaining why it will fall apart if only the West will stop with these illusions. And we were rather desperate because there were so many illusions, so many people believe that is forever, that will never end, that you have to learn to live with the Soviet Union as it is and not to confront it. The fact that American president sees the real nature of this empire, and probably he said much more. There were some parts of the quotes, but you understand that he understands who he is facing. That is the best encouraging sign which we got for all these years in prison. And we were so excited. And for those of us who were on the punishment cells, so they don't read the newspaper. So we were sending them message by Morris, knocking from one cell to the other, speaking through the toilets, that everybody will know what a great event happened. A few years after this, when I came first, when I was released and came with my first visit to America, and of course I met President Reagan to thank him for all what he was doing. And when I was telling him about this, that the great day in prison when we found out about his speech, he became very excited. He called her and said, listen what this guy says. Can you repeat it? And then I understood that for him, it was really a difficult moment. And one of those who was at this meeting rushed up to me and said, you saved all my career because, I am the one who wrote that speech. I was the speechwriter. And you can't even imagine how many problems I had for the speech and how many problems had the president. So thank you for what you said. So yes, that was a historical speech of American president. But then I found out later about many other speeches in which he was saying very clearly that communism will be found in the dustbin of history because it's against the nature of people, against their desire to be free. And it was unbelievable that finally there is a president who understands very well what Soviet Union is.
So we see the moral power of the American president, that the words that come out of the Oval Office can end up being passed on in Morse code and through toilet bowls in gulags, not just in the Soviet Union, but around the world, encouraging dissidents and making them know that they're never alone. Let's go to another Washington Insider story. The Reagan administration, especially after Ronald Reagan meets your wife, meets Avital, and is so moved by her plight, really tries to move heaven and earth to get you freed. And Avital at one point gets called into the White House and is told by Lawrence Eagleburger and Max Kampelman that they have negotiated a chance, an opportunity for you to be free. And even though you haven't spoken in years, even though you've been married for all of one day, she says you're not going to take the deal, and indeed you don't take the deal. Why wouldn't you take the deal that was offered to free you from the gulag at that time?
Yes, well, President Reagan, as it became clear after this to me, put a condition that he is not ready to finish the Madrid meeting. Madrid meeting was another stage of Helsinki process of negotiations, and to sign the communique without my release. And the Soviets entered the negotiations with Kampelman and Eagleberg. And then Eagleberg and Kampelman became very excited when they proposed the deal that we will release him without demanding from him to recognize his guilt, without asking us for giving him pardon, but he has to write a letter that because of my bad health, I ask Soviet Union to show the humanism and to let me go home. So only to say that I am in poor health and please let me go. They believed it's a huge victory that now, because Soviet Union, of course, was demanding that it will be recognized that I am a criminal and so on. Here they drove this demand. Avital immediately said, I don't think he'll sign such a letter. And they were furious. They thought that it's simply irresponsible, that she's such an extremist. She wants war instead of getting her husband out. And then finally I got a meeting with my family, and definitely I got it in order I could hear about this proposal. And they told me, and I said immediately I will not do it. And then I wrote a letter from prison explaining why I cannot do it. Because we had a confrontation between evil empire and the free world and the people who want to be free. And in this confrontation, there is no way that you will recognize that they have a moral power to judge me and to show humanism and so on. They are immoral force, and our position is moral and clear. And with the time, this struggle is less and less about your personal survival. From the very beginning, you understand that if your aim is personal survival, you'll be broken. The struggle is about remaining free person in prison, saying the truth about the power, and continue this confrontation. So, and I said immediately, the only thing which I can sign is demand to release me because it was the crime to arrest me, and to punish those who put me in the prison. That I can sign. I saw that it is very difficult for my mother, but she understands me, but it's very, very difficult for her to accept. And then I wrote her a letter about Galileo Galilei from prison, which became like a letter which later was studied in some yeshivas and schools in Israel. I said that my interrogators once tried to use the name of Galileo Galilei to weaken me. They were saying, look, that such a great scientist was arrested. He recognized at some moment when he was in a very difficult situation in the Inquisition, he said, yes, you're right, the sun is circling around there. And then he was released and did whatever he wanted to do and continued his work. So why shouldn't you do the same? And they thought then, in the interrogation, the great scientist, 400 years ago, in the moment of weakness, gave up to Inquisition. And 400 years after this modern Inquisition is trying to use it to weaken the other people. Do I really want that my request to the Soviets to show their humanism will be used to undermine, to weaken the other prisoners? Do I really want to give them any moral argument in our struggle that maybe they are right? Of course not. After all, everything is connected. Everything is interconnected. Galileo Galilei discovered the law of interconnection of the bodies. There is law of the interconnection of souls, and we have to strengthen one another, not to weaken one another. All our struggle is how we can strengthen the other Jews and the Jews of the world who are fighting for us, and not how to give any argument to KGB that maybe they are moral force. So that's why I spent another 3 years in prison. Well, it's something with the connection.
Is Gil frozen? Gil, are you frozen?
Yeah,
Gil may have froze briefly. Yeah.
yeah.
People can
Well,
put their
but did you
questions
hear
in the
me, guys?
chat.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you fine. We hear you
Uh-huh.
fine, very powerfully. And people can put their questions in the chat until Gil's unfrozen, and we'll ask, and we can bring the questions to Natan.
Hmm.
I think Gil just came back.
So was I cut off, or was the time?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Gil,
you-
you froze, Gil. So
Yeah, Gil, we can start everything from the very beginning because you were frozen. No, you're frozen again. Okay,
okay, unfortunately, Gil froze.
yeah. Well,
So Natan, in the meantime, can you I can ask a question until
Yeah.
Gil comes back. I was reading this story in the book about where you asked to review the evidence of your trial. You were allowed to review the evidence, and while you were
Yeah.
reviewing it,
yeah,
you asked to see a videotape several times. I found that very powerful story.
okay.
The army.
I can tell you why Gil is frozen. Let me tell the story. That after more than a year of interrogations, then there is preparation for the trial, and under the Soviet law, I, together with the lawyer, permitted to see the materials. Well, I had no lawyer because they, of course, refused my choice. I said my mother will find the lawyer. She said that Irving Kotter is wishing to be my lawyer. Of course, KGB had their own lawyer. And I said, no, I am not going to talk to a lawyer. I have already one prosecutor. I don't need two prosecutors. So I myself have to learn all these materials. There is 150 volumes because they really prepared it against all our movement and every meeting with every center, simply with tourists. They're all my accomplices. And every meeting that I organized, every letter which we sent abroad, all this was high treason, so a lot of materials. And I'm slowly for 3 months as I'm reading everything, learning, and then I see that they are quoting, in their material, they are quoting some film which appeared in the West after my arrest. And there are some famous Jewish activists who are saying how important was my work, and they're using it as a proof that I was illegal connector between the West and Soviet and America and Soviet Union. So I immediately demand to see this film. I said, there are quotes against me, I have to see the film. Okay, they didn't want, but then I said I will not sign. I will declare in the court that I was not given an opportunity to see the materials which are using against me. So one day they're bringing to the interrogation room this video, first time in my life that I saw how you can put some cassette into TV and see the film. And this film about demonstration in front of Soviet embassy in London. Suddenly you see this demonstration led by my wife. And of course, I forget everything. And it's so powerful, as if your wife, after all this year and a half of absolute isolation, I can see her leading the demonstration. And then when it was like 20 minutes film, the moment finished, I demanded to show it to me again. They said, why? Because I said, it's my English is poor. I didn't understand this phrase and this, and maybe this one will be used against me. So I have to understand well. So second time, and when I demanded it for the third time, then this Colonel Volodin, who was the head of the team of 17 interrogators, he became angry and he said, "What do you think? What you like to watch it? You hope you'll be saved by these people? Look who they are. They're a bunch of students and housewives. That's all. Who is behind your wife? Bunch of students and housewives. And we are KGB. So you think they will help you? You have to work with us. Only we can help you." And I think that this Colonel Volodin, that is the definition with which he has to go into the history, because he gave an absolutely outstanding definition of our movement of students and housewives. So after I was released, I traveled 1,000 times. I was speaking to the audience of students and housewives and was thanking them for that their army defeated Soviet Union and defeated KGB.
I'm back. Sorry about that technical glitch. So indeed, when you're out and you're freed and you have an opportunity to say to Avital, I'm sorry I was late, and she says this is the end of one long day, you understand you still have a responsibility to the Soviet Jews left behind. Tell us a little bit about the March on Washington and the pressures that you were under not to march on Washington amid the time of Gorby fever, when Mikhail Gorbachev was coming to Washington, D.C. to bring peace on earth, and you Jews and you Soviet refuseniks were going to undermine that opportunity.
Yeah, well, check, the idea of the March of Washington was expressed by me more than 1 year before this march, when I first came to America. And I already knew from my wife and the other activists that the main challenge in our dealing with the Jewish establishment is to make them think about big figures, because we were saying, the activists were saying, there are 400,000 Jews who want to leave Soviet Union. And this figure 400,000 was counted very simply. The number of invitations which were asked minus the number of people who left. So there are 400,000 people who already took the risky step, asked for invitation, and are not released. Somehow, Jewish establishment, both in Israel and in America, prefer to speak about there are 3,000 Jewish refuseniks who are active. There are 25,000 that we know there are there. We cannot speak about bigger figures. So one of the tasks which I got from Avital in continuing the struggle is to remind people that we are speaking about hundreds of thousands. And I was using this phrase all the time. And somehow when there was a grand reception of Mayor Koch reception in New York, and there was all the leaders of Jewish organizations, it occurred to me simply like a practical tool. I said, Gorbachev at some moment will come to America. When there'll be his first visit to America, let's 400,000 American Jews come to Washington to remind to Gorby that there are 400,000 Soviet Jews. I use it simply in order to people will understand how big is this figure. But the moment I said it, I really liked it. Why not? Why not to have this huge march on Washington? And I heard that Elie Wiesel was already speaking before to the young people saying, why shouldn't you march on Washington? I came next day, as I was speaking with Elie Wiesel, and he said, Natan, if you really think seriously about this march, only students will do. No, establishment organizations will not do it. They will be scared. I couldn't even understand what he means. But very quickly I found out that whenever I was going and quoting it, so the response of official Jewish organizations was stop doing it. First of all, we don't know if there are 400,000, there are maybe 40,000. Second, how many people can come to Washington, Jews, in winter? It will be in winter, and it's not New York, and there are maximum 18,000 Jews that we can bring to Washington if it is winter. And third, it is the time of when Gorby is the most popular person, the person of the great change. Everybody loves him. We American Jews will be those who will like warmongers, who are against him. Can we compromise our position in America? So for a few months, it was very disappointing. And then I decided what I really did simply when it became more real that Gorbachev probably in the next half a year will come. I moved for 3 months with Avital, now newly born daughter, who was 10 months old, Rachel, to America. And I started traveling all over the communities. And in every community, everybody wanted it. It was clear, exactly as Eddie said, go to students. I spoke at the universities, I spoke in schools, I was giving many interviews. Everybody wanted this demonstration. And nobody was scared. 400,000, 300,000, as many as you want. But then the argument that we cannot go against the will of our administration. Okay, I and Avital went straight to President Reagan. We had was very good relations, but he never saw us together. He met us separately. So we said that we want to thank you together. We came to him, and I told him, you know, soon Gorbachev will come, and many of American Jews and us want to have a big demonstration. We hope you will understand it's not against you. And I was choosing with the words. He stopped and said, what, somebody thinks that I want to be friends with Gorbachev when he is keeping your people in prison? You do everything what you have to do, and I'll do everything what I have to do. So I went to the leaders of Jewish organizations and said, Reagan wants this demonstration. Maurice Abrams, who was the head of the Conference of Presidents, after this went to Senator Schultz and said, Senator Schultz, Secretary of State Schultz, and said, do you really want this demonstration? He said, not only we want this demonstration, I want that when Gorbachev comes on every TV screen, he will see that people are protesting. So I have to say, exactly as my wife was telling to me, that first you go to the activists who don't like establishment, but they are putting the first push. And then establishment will take it, will support, will organize, will do wonderful things, and takes all the credit. And that's when you understand that you have won. That's exactly how it happened. And like 5 weeks before Gorbachev came, there was final official decision of Jewish organizations to have this march. And it was this unbelievable logistical operation. And the establishment made a great job in organizing this and taking as many trains and airplanes as possible. Then 250,000 Jews came to Washington. It was the biggest demonstration, equal to the demonstration of Martin Luther King. And next day, President Reagan started his meeting with Gorbachev, saying that, you see, our people were speaking, my people will not permit me to ignore these problems of the Jews. So that's the reminder to us about our power. And in fact, that was the last big battle in the 25 years of struggle of American Jews for the Soviet Jewry.
Before I turn to some questions, I promised people that we would get a little bit into when Bill Clinton mocked you for appearing at a meeting that you didn't appear at. You remember that the story with Camp David? And I think that can get to some of the issues of Oslo and your critique of the peace process, even though you are incredibly pro-peace.
Yeah, I have to say, this remarks of Clinton, which were done like 15 years later after the events, caught me by surprise. When General said quoting, I said, no, it cannot be. But Clinton said that in Camp David, he found Sharansky was the most difficult and that he didn't want any peace and so on. But then when I read it carefully, I understood, look, it was already the stage when he was making all his speeches, trying to remember details which will be interesting for audience. He confused things. I never was in Camp David. In fact, I resigned from Barak's government before he went to Camp David, exactly because of this. And they want Barak that you will not bring us peace, you will bring us war. But we did have very long discussions and very friendly discussions with Clinton in the negotiations 2 years before. And I had an opportunity being part of the delegation of Bibi Netanyahu.
At why?
In Y Plantation there, 1997. And Camp David was in 2000 with the Barak government. But then I explained to Clinton that what is my approach, why I think Arafat, as a dictator of his own people, in order to keep them under control, will never stop being our enemy. He needs us as the enemies. And the only way that to check and to try to push also agreement to something serious, you have to demand from him that he will be speaking in Arabic, the same word that he's speaking to you in English. And that first thing to recognize, to say to his people that we recognize the state of Israel, it means that we are not going to go back to Haifa and to Lod and to Tel Aviv. And as long as he is not even ready to say it, and you keep saying that, okay, both sides are symmetrical, both sides, we have to bring them to the table of peace. And he is preparing his people all the time to the war against us, because that is the way of survival of him as a dictator. It will not work. And in fact, then he said that he agrees with me, and he went to Arafat, because it was three delegations negotiations, and demanded from him to that first you have officially in Hebrew, in Arabic, to recognize the existence of State of Israel. And there were developments which we are describing in the book. But he was a great listener, I have to say, and we had very good relations, friendly. But he listened, and you feel that he understands. For the first time, you have the leader who really understands what you're talking about the importance of linkage between peace and democracy. But then he goes back to the negotiation table and does exactly what his advisors are telling him to do. And by the way, just in the days of Pollard, that was the days when I was the only one who was present in that conversation between Bibi and Clinton, when Clinton did promise to release Pollard. In exchange, of course, for the signing this agreement, we had to drop some of our demands about Arafat giving us some of the terrorists, but he agreed. And then next day, the head of his CIA office said, "You don't know what you're talking about. We cannot agree with this." And so he retreated from his clear, direct agreement to release Pollard then in the end of the 90s. Yeah.
So the core critique wasn't that we cannot make peace with Palestinians, but we cannot make peace with a Palestinian dictatorship, which as a dictatorship is feeding off of hatred of Israel and is trying to build against Israel and at the same time supposedly making peace. We have time for one question from the audience from Dodi Katz, which helps us touch on the very important book that you wrote, which George W. Bush helped make a bestseller, The Case for Democracy. And she writes about your town square test as the litmus test for free speech or fear speech. And she points out that unfortunately today in the United States, it seems that fear speech is pushing out free speech. You grew up as a double thinker. And what is now when you see doublethink in America emerging, what can be done about it? And is this, are we exaggerating it? Is there a serious problem with cancel culture? Is there a serious problem with the new totalitarianism? Or is this just an illusion?
I believe it's a very serious threat. And we write about it in our book. I really believe that the main confrontation in political life in America in the years to come will be not between left and right, but between liberals and so-called progressives. Progressives, which people who don't think in terms of human rights, but think in terms of the world is divided between the oppressed and the oppressors, and the oppressed are always right, and we have to challenge all the privileges of the so-called oppressors. But to bring it back to some very basic facts. So in Soviet Union, and I describe it in the book, The Case for Democracy, and then we come back to this problem now. Book. Every totalitarian regime, there are true believers in the regime, there are a small group of dissidents who challenge the regime, and there is huge majority of double thinkers, people who don't believe in this regime, who don't believe in this ideology, but who are afraid to speak publicly. And on one, this phenomenon of double think on one hand is very dangerous. On the other hand, it was very promising because The longer is dictatorship, the more and more people have to be controlled by KGB in order not to cross the line between the doublethink and the dissent. And the moment masses of people cross this line, revolution happens. That was my theory. Here is Town Square's test. That was all about totalitarian regimes. The fact that many years after, I'll find this phenomenon of doublethink in Harvard. For the first time, I remember I was surprised in 2003 at the times of Intifada, when there are so many victims every day in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I'm traveling all over the campuses, and one woman from business school of Harvard says to me, I really wanted to sign this letter against divestment. That was how then was BDS called, in support of Israel. But I know that at least 3 of my professors, who are very important for my career, will not like it, and it can influence my career. I decided not to do it. I have to start my career, and then we'll see. And I thought, my God, it's not in Moscow University 25 years ago, at the times of communism, when really everybody was scared of their career. It's in Harvard, in business school. And then I saw it more and more, how more and more young Jews were telling me that they prefer to be silent in order not to lose their friends, in order not to lose their position, in order they have to think about their career. And what started as a dangerous phenomenon of doublethink and 20 years ago, today becomes almost the norm. As we saw in some studies of the public opinion, today there are more than 60% of people who prefer not to speak publicly about their political views in America. I think it's extremely dangerous phenomenon. Of course, America is as free as only one can be, but the moment citizens themselves are giving up or making compromise with their right as a free people to speak freely their minds, I think that's a dangerous station. And if I am an American leader, I should think day and night how to explain this. And by the way, it started from Israel, and it is one of the most difficult topics for many Jews to speak. But now in the atmosphere of cancel culture, it's about many topics of so-called political correctness, and people are very afraid to cross some invisible red lines and to become dissidents in their own milieu.
So in Case for Democracy, we talk about it coming from the top down, and here we're talking about it from the bottom up. Just to sum up, because we want to respect everybody's time, someone asked the perfect question to end, which is, why is the book called Never Alone? All these stories in the book add up to a series of ideological statements. We call the book not a memoir, but a memoir-festo, or a manifestoir. And the book is structured along the lines of Natan's career, which is 999, 9 years in Gulag, 9 years in Israeli politics, 9 years in the Jewish Agency. And we literally signed a book contract, 999, which I never liked, because a book title should never be an inside joke, because Natan often says, I was 9 years here, 9 years there, 9 years there. I don't know where I suffered most. And then he adds usually in politics. But I also worried about our Christian friends who might hear 999, think 666, the devil. I worried about my German friends, 999. And I'm sitting in Los Angeles with my friend David Suissa of the LA Jewish Journal. And I'm saying, we need a book title. He says, well, tell me about the book. And I tell the story that Natan told today about having the opportunity to leave the Gulag earlier, but not being willing to give in to the Soviet Union and allow them to look like they're a humanitarian regime. But knowing also, as he's being told, you're forgotten, you're abandoned, that he was never alone. And so he says, that's it. For 75 years, we've been obsessed with never again. And of course, we have to continue to honor and revere our Holocaust martyrs. But now, the opportunity, the challenge, is to tell every single one of our young people and remind every single Jew that when you're a part of this amazing network called the Jewish people, you're never alone. And so the book tries to talk about the power of dialogue, tries to talk the power of having disagreement, understanding that we can have unity without uniformity, and the power of never alone, that we're part of this extraordinary network which is deeply rooted in our history, expresses certain values, but also has us looking out for one another, as we've seen from the different perspectives, as Natan has seen from his perspectives, as I've seen from my perspective. Despite our very different experiences, ideologically, we might have fought here and there about wording, about paragraphing, about pacing, but we were completely on the same page ideologically, because we know we're blessed to be a part of this extraordinary network called the Jewish people, and to know that when you're a part of that people, you're never alone. And one of the exciting things about the book reception, it's been a little weird doing this constantly just from Jerusalem, and being on Zoom is like kissing through a handkerchief. You never quite know if you've connected, but we've done meetings with Hillel students, which ended up having 1,800 viewers the first night and 3,600, very powerful numbers, we were told a week after. We had the opportunity of studying with 400 different students from 3 schools in the Brooklyn area, in Brooklyn, where donors paid for everyone to have a book. They read the book, and then we talked about these issues. And tonight, we had the opportunity with our Washington family, our Washington friends, to talk about Sharansky, Washington, and the Jewish people, and never alone. Thank you very much, Laila Tov, Rav Shmuel.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to Natan and to Gil, and thank you to everybody. Have a great night. And to you, to Gil and Natan, have a great day.
Yeah.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Bye.